Hello, on Price Focus. A few weeks ago, you might remember me plugging the Time Out Gambling Recovery Project and then mentioning how a listener got in touch to ask for help with their own gambling issues. With that in mind, I wanted to talk a little more about the group and what they do so people can get help if they feel they need it. So, with that in mind, I'm joined by the project lead, Ben Jones, to tell us a little more about them and his own story. Ben, good to have you with us. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show today.
No, good to have you with us. Appreciate you joining us. An important issue, obviously, especially around football, I guess, because people are so exposed to gambling advertising. I mean, they might be on this show in audio before some of the shows. I don't do gambling readouts, and I don't want to kind of sound like I'm all pious about gambling either, because I do like a little bet myself. But I wanted to get your story and try and help people if there's anyone who is listening who feels they might need some assistance with their own situation. So,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into what you do and how people can get assistance if they need it?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name's Ben, and I'm the project lead for Time Out, based in Nottingham city centre. And the reason I'm in this line of work is, like so many other people in who do this sort of role, is that I've got my own lived experience of gambling. So it started when I was at university. I was 18, 19 years old, and I was betting really small amounts of money, 50 pence, a pound, £2, really, really negligible states that people, are probably used to doing it every now and then. But for whatever reason, gambling just took hold of me, and I loved it, and I loved the feeling it gave me. It gave me a purpose. I felt like at that time of my life, I was a little bit lost. I didn't really know what I was doing with my life, and gambling just gave me something to focus on. And within 6 months, I was already at the stage where I was hiding my gambling. I was missing lectures because of it. And I was spending more money than realistically I could afford, and it just never stopped for the next 10 years from there, really. And as time went on, it just increased in volume and in the amount of money I was betting, and also the types of things I was betting. Because when I first started gambling, it was Premier League football, top level rugby, top level cricket, sports that I had an interest in, sports that I knew some information about. But 5, 6 years down the line, I'm now betting at 7 a.m. on Chinese volleyball and Japanese um, badminton. Sports that I had no idea about. I was just completely addicted, and it consumed my whole life. I was literally gambling on anything I could, and with that, of course, came a lot of time, but also came a lot of money that was spent. And like any addiction, you uh, need to increase the amount you do it to get the same level of feeling. And for me, that was more money and more time. So I'd spend more money, more time, and my stakes went from 50 pence a pound, £2. By this stage, I was maybe betting a couple of £1,000 per bet, and it was completely ruining my life. I had no money in the bank. I was using credit cards and loans and overdrafts and all the usual stuff to fund my gambling. And eventually, all lines of credit ran out. I couldn't get credit from anywhere. My credit rating was so bad. But I still had this really strong urge to gamble. If I didn't gamble, I couldn't get up in the morning. I didn't feel like I could function as a human unless I was gambling. So I made the ridiculous decision one day at work to essentially steal money. I had a customer wanting to pay for an order, and I got them to pay me the money rather than the company. I took that money, I gambled with it, and when I didn't get caught, that just kind of opened that door to me thinking, well, maybe next time I need some money to gamble, I can do it again. And that's what I did. And what started off as a one off, maybe a month later, I did it again. And just like my previous gambling history, it went from being very rare, very small, to all of a sudden being pretty much every day I was stealing money. And eventually it all caught up to me, and I was found out. I had to admit what I was doing. And and yeah, the company found out I was stealing money, and ultimately I was charged with fraud. And when I was charged, I was charged with stealing a large amount of money. It was about £370,000 I was charged with stealing. So, huge financial impact. But that was the day that I kind of realized um, that I really, really needed to get help. Otherwise, it was just going to ruin my life even more than it did. So that's what I did, and that was the last day that I gambled on. And since then, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working in this sector and supporting other people so that people don't need to go through what I did, and I can support them. So yeah, that's like a couple of minutes of my story, as brief as I can pull it, I think.
How did you deal psychologically with gambling? Not in the partly in the sense of not getting caught by the police, but I assume you're kind of living a lie the whole time around family and friends, because I guess you wouldn't have told anyone about this then.
Yeah, the thing about gambling that makes it a little bit unique compared to the traditional, issues that we see with drugs and alcohol is no one really knew what was going on. There was no visible signs, right? I wasn't turning up to work intoxicated. I wasn't getting pulled over by the police for swerving all over the road. No one could smell gambling on me. So it was very easy for me to hide it, for the 10 years that I did, which meant that ultimately it progressed to the level, to levels far beyond what it might have done if I was drinking or using another substance. And yeah, and I just became a professional liar. I was able to lie about finances and take control of the household finances so that no one else knew what was coming in and out. And yeah, it was like a 24/7 mission, you know, to get the money to gamble, to hide the fact that I was gambling, to still be able to pay the bills and make it look like I was earning money. And yeah, I don't know how I had the mental capacity for it, to be honest, because it takes up a lot of bandwidth to to be that creative, to be able to to gamble that much. And it's something that I think, as gamblers, we become very good at, is controlling the situation, manipulating people, lying, and just doing anything we can to get hold of that money. So yeah, it was a massive lie. Probably 10 years of my life where I almost forgot how to tell the truth in many ways.
Was there kind of a reason for you whether, because I heard you say, you bet a small fee, like I'll have a bet £1 on
Mm.
A Premier League accumulator every Saturday, and I've done that for years and years. Is there a trigger for yourself and other gambling addicts that makes it escalate? Is it just diminishing dopamine returns that mean you have to escalate things, or is that oversimplifying it?
Yeah, I think it's complex and it's different for everyone. And like you say, there are many people who can have a have an accumulator on the weekend, or bet every now and then on the football and not see it as, not see it progress like it did. I think with a lot of addiction, it's rooted in trauma or depression or pain. So that activity that we're doing, whether it's gambling, drinking, or using drugs, helps us cope with something else that isn't going on in our life. And I think the time I started gambling at 18 years old, I I wasn't satisfied with my life. I didn't feel like I was making the right life decisions. I was at uni, I wasn't really enjoying it. I was believe I was suffering with depression. I never really went out and socialized or met people. I was very isolated, and gambling just gave me that ability to escape my life. And that's what we see with a lot of people. It's escapism, it's a coping mechanism. People think of gambling as a financial addiction, but it's not really. I mean, that comes into it, but really it's rooted in trying to trying to hide away from the world and cope with something that's in the background. So for me, with a lot of the people I deal with, that's quite common. Is that there'll be something else going on in their life, and gambling will just allow them to cover up that and escape that world for a little bit. And as time goes on, they just become dependent on it. And like you say, dopamine diminishes, and you need to gamble more and more. And whereas a normal gambler might get a hit of dopamine when they win a bet, or when it's when 4 of their 5 legs of their accumulator have won and there's 10 minutes to go in the other game and they need a goal for it to come in, that's when you might feel dopamine with gambling. As it progresses, you actually just get that dopamine from placing the bet. So
Mm.
just the activity of placing that bet gave me that dopamine. So in many ways, it didn't actually matter if I won or lost. As long as I was gambling, my brain was getting what it needed. So yeah, that's essentially how it works.
You talk about, you end up in legal trouble, you end up in prison, and you get help there, which I guess is, I was going to say an extreme example, but I guess it's very common. But that was the point for you, that you need to get help. Was there help out there for you? Because I guess times, even 5 years ago, the situation might have been different.
Yeah, it was very different 5 years ago, and it's a good point that you raise actually, that me going to prison was kind of the rock bottom that many people refer when they enter recovery from addiction, and mine was certainly on the more extreme end. Um, but as you heard, I didn't start there. It kind of progressed. And there was probably 10, 15 flashpoints in that 10 years that I could have spoken to someone and got support, but I just chose not to. Um, so that's something we definitely want to focus on, is trying to get people to talk about their gambling, their gambling earlier. And nowadays, compared to 5 years ago, there's so much more support. I mean, when I went to my GP 5 years, sorry, it's probably 7 years ago now, with my gambling, they didn't really know what to do. They kind of gave me some phone numbers. One was for a drug and alcohol service. One was for um, uh, a generic counselling service, and one of them didn't even work. And I kind of left that GP appointment feeling like I was the only person in the world who's gambling, because n- my doctor's never heard about it. There's no support out there. Thankfully, that's changed a lot now. There's a lot of support around, and obviously the organisation that I work is one of them. So in many ways, there's never been a better time to access support for your gambling.
And one last question before we go on to your group in particular. You mentioned something about gambling addiction, which I hadn't thought of was interesting. If you've got a drug problem or an alcohol problem, it's quite, easier to spot, and your friends and your family can intervene and get you help. With a
Yeah.
gambling addiction, I suppose you can only really get yourself help, and that makes
Mm.
it an even bigger challenge. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's really fair, because like you say, with drugs and alcohol, my wife, my family, my workplace would have known that something was going on, and that doesn't mean that I would have gotten help, but there would have been that external pressure coming from them. Whereas as it was, no one really knew. I mean, my wife knew something was going on, but she didn't know what it was. She thought I was having an affair. She thought I was struggling with mental health. She had no idea it was gambling. So, in many ways, as an addict, it was great, because it allowed me to carry on with that behavior kind of unchecked. But the reality of it is, it made it much harder for me to get support, because there wasn't that other pressure. So I think that's a fair point with gambling. Yeah.
Just tell us a bit about your group then, and how people get in touch. More specifically, what you do as well, how you help people.
Yeah, so we're a recovery service based in Nottingham city centre, for anyone in Nottingham who's affected by gambling. And what we essentially do, is quite varied. So at the heart of our experience, I guess you're speaking with someone who has got lived experience, and connection is a huge part of recovery. I mentioned a few minutes ago that I felt like I was alone. I felt like I was the only person in the world gambling, because there was no other support out there. Whereas that is the first thing you have when you come to timeout. You speak to someone who's been in your shoes, and who has recovered, and that gives you a sense of connection, because they've been through the same thing as you. But it also gives you that hope and that belief that recovery is possible. So that's the first benefit you get from timeout. In terms of what we offer a variety of things. So what we like to do is have one-to-one sessions. So we get people in a room with us, get them in front of us, and we get them to talk about their gambling. We look at their gambling, we look at what triggers them, we look at the harm that's coming from it, and then we link in with all these other services. So, for example, we might have a conversation with someone who's gambling, and what they really lack in their life is connection. They're isolated. They don't talk to anyone. They don't make friends. So in that case, we might send them to an organisation that offers group support or a fellowship or somewhere where they can go and meet other people, and they can go there and get that support, and at the same time come in and see us, and we'll work on stuff like strength-based therapy, which is all about building hope and building optimism and really showing people that recovery is possible and that they have the strength inside themselves to recover. You weren't born like this. Something happened along the way. The power to recover is actually in your hands. So we do lots of interventions based around strength-based therapy, which really enable people to build that hope and that belief that they can actually recover. And then we also offer group sessions. So we will have facilitated groups. And what we really want to do is build a community of people within Nottingham who are recovering from gambling related harm. Because if you get 5, 6, 7, 10 people in a room who've all got that shared experience, it's an incredibly powerful way for anyone looking for support to enter that group and look at all these people who are coming together to help each other and are working on their recovery. So we will support someone right from the very first time they get in touch, through their whole journey. So while they go off and get other support elsewhere, they're still anchoring their recovery to us. And in the long term, we've got the group sessions and the further support. And what we're also really keen on in the project is looking at things from a holistic point of view. So, you know, I mentioned earlier, gambling is quite often rooted in pain or trauma or a dissatisfaction with life. So you can go and get treatment on gambling and have CBT and have all these therapies that teach you how to cope with urges and things like that. But if we don't look at your environment and the other parts of your life and start to build them up, then when you go back into that environment, those triggers are still going to be there. So one of the things that we do is encourage people to access courses. We can get people through group training. We have access to loads of courses that um, they can get on to really rebuild their life. We look at things like their physical activity, their mental health, their finances. So we help in all these areas that are impacted by gambling. So it's really quite a unique service, but we look at the individual as a whole rather than just saying, we're going to focus on your gambling. We really want to help them, build a better life after gambling. So yeah, that's kind of a rough outline of the type of things that we do in our sessions.
Are the people who use the service kind of similar in the sense that they're mostly men? I guess a lot of them people who probably bet on sports have similar interests in life, or again, is that me massively oversimplifying it and each case is different?
Mm. It's really varied, actually. I think one thing that's been known for quite a few years now is that gambling isn't a male-only problem. It
Mm.
kind of affects anyone, but one of the problems that we've had in the past is getting women to access services. However, what we're finding with Time Out is actually we're pretty much on a 50-50 split between male and female at the minute in terms of the clients we're working with. So we have got a good split. And again, in terms of what they're betting on, it's really, really varied. What we tend to find is that men, especially, most men start to gamble on football. So they will start with their accumulators or they're betting on who's going to win the Premier League or who's going to be relegated and things like that. And then once you get onto these websites, um, the margins for the bookmakers aren't particularly big when it comes to sports betting. So what they really want you to do is they want to move you over to their casino-based games or their slot-based games. So what you'll find is a lot of really heavy marketing towards these sorts of games. Um, and these sorts of games are the evidence shows much more addictive. So they get you on the slots, they get you on the casino games, and then we see people who now just exclusively bet on these type of things. They've moved completely away from their sports betting. So it's really varied, and that's not to say people can't just bet on sports, because that's all I did. Um, but we work with people from everything from sports betting, scratch cards, slot machines, even things like cryptocurrency. So it's really quite a varied cohort of people that we see.
Would you want there to be a lot more regulation then, because people are exposed to advertising, or because there's so many things like you mentioned there, even cryptocurrency?
Mm.
Is that not something you massively concern yourself with at the moment?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I feel like, for example, when we look at football, there is an over dependence on sponsorship in football coming from gambling companies. Like that's pretty clear to see. So I think there definitely should be some tighter regulation. But at the end of the day, I'm not anti-gambling. I respect people's choices to gamble. Um, so it's a really difficult one. I would like to see some tighter regulations, but at the end of the day, gambling's here to stay. So what we really need to do is make sure that those people who are gambling are protected, and that there's support out there for them. So one of the things we do is look at blocking tools and software that can block gambling for you, and self-exclusion schemes. And we really want to emphasize that the people who can gamble in a normal way have that choice. But for those who can't, there are some really good options out there to help you stop as well. So yeah, regulation's a tough one, and it's going to divide a lot of opinions.
I suppose people watching this, one of the big questions for them will be, do I need to get help? I mean, where do you
Mm.
draw the line to say actually this person should reach out? Is it around a loss of control then? Once you feel like it's out of control, then you need help.
Yeah, so I'm normally quite hesitant to share my personal story, for the fact that it's like you said, it is on the extreme end, because not everyone is stealing money to fund their gambling. And actually, the harm started well before that. The harm of my gambling started when I was back at uni, when I was probably only losing 10, £15 a week. But it was already affecting my school life, my grades and my ability to socialize and things like that. So it, we have a saying at Timeout: it's never too early, it's never too late. And it's never too late is kind of, it doesn't matter if you have stolen money, it doesn't matter if you're in prison, it doesn't matter if you've lost your house and your family. It's not too late to turn your life around. But what we really want to see, and what we really want to emphasize, is it's never too early. So if you feel that you have a relationship with gambling where maybe you're losing a bit of control, you're gambling more than you would like to, maybe you have a plan of only gambling on the weekend, and then you end up gambling on the midweek games, or it's starting to impact your family life, or you're starting to have to go to the toilet at work so you can get a bet on. All these little signs are maybe starting to show that gambling is controlling you rather than you controlling it. It's never too early. Come and have a conversation, and that conversation may be, um, you know, maybe we don't need to get you into full scale quote unquote treatment, but maybe you can just have some support through us, chat to someone who's been through that experience, and get that support you need. So what I'd say to anyone is, just because you're ringing up to have a conversation with us doesn't mean that you'll necessarily have to label yourself as a gambling addict or a problem gambler. It's just that you want to explore that relationship with gambling, and have a chat, and have a conversation, and that's where it starts. It's not it's not about contacting us because you've lost everything. We want people to be able to contact us much earlier in that process. And I liken it to going on a diet. If you start to put on a little bit of weight, and you kind of, you put on a couple of pounds, and you think, oh, I best address that, and I best start to eat better and exercise. You've got a lot less harm to undo. It's much easier. Whereas if you carry on eating and not exercise, and you put on 50, 60, 70 pounds, you've got a much longer road to recover and get back to where you were. And it's the same with gambling. Like, come and have a chat with us earlier so that you don't progress to the stage where you're stealing money or you end up in prison like I did. That's the ultimate goal, is to really get people through the door at an earlier stage.
I'll drop the link for the website in the description, and I'll put it as a pinned comment as well on YouTube. But you can find the link in the audio description as well.
Mm.
For people who aren't in Nottingham or international, are there any resources that you would recommend for them who can't necessarily make it over to you guys?
Yeah, so if you're not in Nottingham, that if you're UK based, there's loads of support. So what I would recommend is we do have a national gambling helpline, um, and they're open 24/7 hours a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they have the most up to date information with what's available in your local area. So they're a really good place to go to if you're based in the UK. Internationally, it really varies on what country you're in. So I know places like the US have a national gambling helpline, but other countries don't. So there are some resources available online. I can't remember the name of the website now. Forgive me. It's Gambling Therapy is the website, I believe. They have a lot of information about what's available internationally. So yeah, outside of the UK, have a look at Gambling Therapy to see what's in your local area. In the UK, ring the National Gambling Helpline. If you're in Nottingham, give Time Out a call. Our number, our website, our email will be in the link to this episode. So get in touch and have a conversation.
And just lastly, in terms of recovery, it sounds like you're in a good place now, which is
Mm.
is great. Is it a case that you always have to stay on top of it? This isn't addressed at you, but in general, with any addiction, I guess, is it always an ongoing? I don't know if battle's the right word, but something you have to monitor even if you feel like you've recovered.
Yeah, I feel like recovery, especially for someone who was pretty extreme like myself. I think recovery is always going to be part of my life. I will always be doing something to help my recovery. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to a meeting every week or I'm having counseling every week. It might be addressing things in my personal life that are maybe triggering for me. So being open and honest about my finances, or being a better communicator with my partner. So there's lots of little things that aren't necessarily recovery focused that I will probably do for the rest of my life just to keep on top of things. If you address your gambling at an earlier stage, you might get to the stage where actually you're not really interested in gambling anymore. You don't need to get support every week, and it's a little bit easier. But I think for most people who've been at the extreme end, it's advisable to do something pretty regularly about your recovery, even if it's just having a chat with someone who's been through it as well, just to keep that connection in place. So that's probably what I will do for the rest of my life, to be honest.
Well, you've been very open with us, which we appreciate, and hopefully, it helps. If it helps one I don't know, it's a cliche, isn't it? If it helps one person, it's worth it. And I hope that's the case for you, because you're obviously doing
Mm,
a lot of good work. So, yeah, thank
yeah.
you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Just before we go, there was no point in this interview to do an advert that wasn't incredibly jarring. But thank you to the Trent Navigation for their support. The next home game is Palace. In fact, is it after the international break? After the international break. So yeah, get down to Trent Navigation, enjoy the build up for the matches, and we do appreciate their backing. And if you've enjoyed this as ever, or if you found this informative and helpful in any way, do subscribe to the channel. God, this sounds really tacky, doesn't it? I might edit this out. It just feels really jarring because it's such an important thing. But yeah, if you've liked this or it's helpful, just stick a like on the video. I fell into a rhythm there of doing every video, but yeah, interesting discussion and good to have you with us, Ben. Right. Thank you very much, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, then we shall hopefully see you soon.